Okay, so we're here for Dancing with Spirit today. It'll begin a sort of four-part thing ending in uh, October at the Dancing with Spirit, of where we're sort of looking at the wisdom Jesus and that tradition. Um, those of you who didn't make the opening sit, I started with a question, so I'm going to repeat it for those of you guys coming in a little bit later. The first question I started with was, how did a meteor that exploded in Palestine 2,000 years ago become a white plastic dashboard Jesus? That's a way of talking about how did this great wisdom master, uh, and that's what he was, as was the Buddha. We just came off a month of uh, spending with that wisdom master. I have the two of them behind me, Buddha on my left, Jesus on my right. But how did this meteoric wisdom teacher that exploded in Palestine 2,000 years ago, how did he become a white plastic dashboard Jesus? How did he become, in our lives here in this country, a white Christian nationalist movement? How did that happen? How did that happen? And so in this talk, we're going to have to do some deconstruction, which is what the Buddha was all about too. There's a certain brilliance in the fact that Buddha came uh, and started deconstructed how the mind covers over the sacred. And we're not through with the Buddha, of course. You can't be through with the Buddha. You can't be through with the wisdom teacher like Buddha or Jesus. But we're going to spend a month sort of looking at this guy, and we'll have to go right into the Middle East. We'll have to be using, we'll have to turn into Middle Easterners for a while to just understand what he was doing, and um, and deconstruction. We're going to have to deconstruct this dashboard Jesus, try to get what covered over this wisdom master, this meteoric teacher. And it's 2,000 years, and we're going to go into that. Uh, and then by the Dancing with Spirit in October, we'll be able to see something clearly. Uh, I laughed out loud during the recent debate when this was a laugh out loud LOL moment for me during the debate when because they were talking about health care and 9 years ago, and for 60 tries to destroy Obamacare, to repeal it under Trump, they failed. And uh, and so the moderator, one of the forget her name, the woman moderator, she said, "Well, you've been trying for 9 years. You've had 9 years to think about it. What's your plan? If you're going to do better, what's your plan?" And he said, "Well, I have a concept of a plan." And I just laughed out loud. That's how humans approach things sometimes. If you have a concept of God, you don't have much. He has a concept of a plan. Well, really, that's not much. Look at 2025 to see what the healthcare would be. He really doesn't have a plan. Buddha and Jesus didn't have plans so much, but they had a path that they left. And you could say, the Aramaic name that Jesus went by was Yeshua. Uh, and this is part of the deconstruction, part of how we got to the white dashboard Jesus Buddha, white dashboard Jesus uh, figure, was that it got lost in translation. Everything gets translated for 2,000 years. He was speaking Aramaic. He had an Aramaic view of the universe, and that was translated into Greek. Jesus is the Greek for Yeshua in Aramaic, and from Greek it went into Latin, and from Latin it went into Elizabethan English, what was lost? There's a Lost in Translation. There's this interesting movie, Bill Murray in it. What was lost? What was lost? We're going to try to, first of all, see how it got translated and some of the big, how we lost an amazing teaching. Uh, uh, Yeshua, the Aramaic Jesus, he didn't have a concept of a plan. He blazed a trail. And that word blaze is a very interesting word. To blaze a trail mean you cut little marks, and so people could follow the trail, you see. And he left practices. Okay, he left practices, and the Buddha is much more obvious what his practices were because he spelled them out. I mean, again, he's a neurologist. He was by the numbers and very linear because he was working with that left brain and showing how what it does and also what it obscures. And so 500 years after the Buddha, I think it's sort of divine timing. That we got another wisdom teacher who is actually focusing on what the left brain can obscure, unintentionally, of course, but it just happens to obscure the heart, which is a whole other operating system. When you have both, when you have the left brain and you have, which is the survival operating system, and then you have the heart, which is the sacred operating system, you have the whole ball game. You see, uh, it's not either or; it's both and so Jesus brings on that second part. The Buddha implied it by just taking away everything that could cover it, and then you could find it in the silence. That's why the Buddha is the silence. Well, Jesus was the word, as they call him, because he used words and poems, koans, uh, just I call them spiritual hand grenades, which is why he only lasted maybe a couple years, because he was blowing up the whole system of how to deal with regular life, but also the whole system of trying to relate to the sacred. He blew it all up, and of course, the temple elite didn't like it, and then the Romans were afraid of it too, because everybody thought he was going to be like a military king. They kept calling him Messiah, Messiah, Messiah. That he was going to come and kick all the Romans out. That wasn't his deal at all. See, but so the Romans and the Jewish people conspired, the temple elite, the Sanhedrin, and to get rid of this guy. He was bad for business in both cases. But he was very hot. He was like Buddha was cool. That's how he made it, because he had revolutionary wisdom teachings too, in a caste system of India, where everybody was fixed in their little cubbyhole. He blew that apart, but he did it quietly, on the quiet. He invented a monastery where guys could get out of the public domain and work on this stuff and do these teachings. And, they had to go out and beg for food, but then they'd come back. That sort of went on. He invented the monastery. Jesus wasn't a monastic. He was, although he probably hung out with some monastics for that unknown part of his life. What did Jesus do in the middle part of his life? All that speculation. Well, he was hanging out with some Essenes, probably in the desert, where John the Baptist probably was, and doing meditative practice and fasting and all that stuff. So those middle years, he was doing deep spiritual practice. But where we meet him, he's ready to go. Now, I really don't have a plan here. I don't have my usual kind of schematic for how to go through this. I tried, and up to about 8:30 last night, I had pages and pages of stuff, but it just wouldn't work. So I threw it all away, and I started over. And basically, this is what I've got now. You can see this spiritual hand grenades, and this is not. I wouldn't call this a plan, but this is what I've got. As I just sat with blankness and in the emptiness, because all my plans fell apart, you see. And so it was just sort of, I had to go with the spirit and just say, all right, well, you tell me what. And so all this stuff started coming onto the page. You can't actually call this a plan. I had one with the Buddha because he was systematic. Jesus was, they call it stochastic. It's like the system where you throw a pebble in a still pond and it ripples out. And so I'm working from the center towards the outside, and we'll really try to get a sense of the way Jesus worked. He was very hard to understand. He wasn't linear. And so that was my problem. I was trying to put him into a linear form, and he just kept saying, no way. So I'm really sort of on the tightrope here. But what I will make available to you if you're interested after this, and just you can just send me, DWS Dancing with Spirit, and I'll send you. Number one, I'll send you the resources that you can use during this month. A few books that might be helpful. Don't have to use any of them, but if you're interested, uh, and also where I'm getting the Avun thing and the music. So I'll send you that. Plus, I'll send you the first couple of blazes along the trail. These practices that Jesus used. Uh, but so what happened? I mean, I met Jesus in the 50s in Catholic school, and they told me this story. Of course, nobody read the Gospels if you're a Catholic. Those of you know, they tell you the story, and well, along with the ending. And so, who wants to read it? Because I already know the story, and they tell it year after year, but in bits and pieces that don't really fit. And so, but you know the end of the story, and so it's not too interesting. I mean, how many times you're watching the same movie? If you're obsessive, you might do it, but how many times you don't, because you know that story. I thought I knew it as a kid, and we even memorized, like all questions you could have about the story. It was called the Baltimore Catechism, and any question that the bishop might ask you, you had the answer. That was totally unlike Jesus. Totally unlike Jesus. I don't know if I have it here. Oh, I don't. But he was the question over and over again. So what happened? Well, for about 3 centuries after the human Jesus left, and they had the teachings, uh, there was a community that built in the Middle East and even spread to Rome, and throughout the empire it spread. Uh, and It was a very diverse community that had the wisdom teachings. And they were underground because they did the Romans didn't like them. The Jewish temple elite didn't like them, and so they had to stay underground. And some of them got caught, they got tortured. Uh, when I sort of was interested in being a priest because I was an altar boy, it was the mass at that time was like a mysterious thing because it was all in Latin, which had an advantage because you couldn't think too much about it because you didn't know what they were saying. Priests didn't even priests faced the wall, and the people were out here. But it was sort of mysterious, which sort of was an advantage because we're born in mystery, we live in mystery, and we die in mystery. That's the human realm. We think it's logical, but you've lived long enough to know it is not logical, this thing called life. And so the mystery was there, but then they taught you in English all these answers to all these questions. Most of you would probably know, if you're old enough, you know the answer to question 16. Where is God? Raise your hand if you know the answer to that question. Yeah, God is everywhere. Okay. I know him by the numbers, that unfortunately, but that was not Jesus. Jesus was about the question. He didn't have a concept of a plan. You all got a concept of a plan. No, he actually gave specific practices, and that's what I mean. It means to blaze a trail. You leave a little marker. You cut something. You break a branch or whatever, so people can. And he invited us to follow. In command that we follow. There's a lot of paths. Okay, if you look at, we're going to look at most of the paths over the years of spirituality. There's a lot of paths, but it was not a plan. It was a path. He said, "I'm the way." on the path, and that's important. Uh, Now, what got in the way of all that was around the beginning of the fourth century, the Romans stopped persecuting Christians, and Constantine decided, well, we're going to absorb this thing. And why would he want to do that? Well, he said he had a battlefield vision of a cross or something like that, but I'm not sure about all that. But he just saw there was a movement here that was strong. The Romans wrote about it actually in the Roman historians wrote about it when the plague hit Rome. All the uh, all the rich folks left and went up to the high ground and left Rome, and but the Christians who were like slaves, their servants, they're tolerated by that time to be like slaves. They stayed and they ministered to the sick at the risk of their own life. We're just coming out of a plague here. They didn't run away. Their main thing was they ministered to the sick, and many of them died, of course. But one of the Roman historians, I think it was Suetonius, wrote, "Who are these guys? They don't seem to fear death. They don't seem to fear death." And that caught their attention. And so at some point, they absorbed Christianity into the empire. Fourth century. That's when everything started to go off the tracks. It really did. That's when uh, people who are in that wisdom tradition left the big cities and went out to the desert because they left the area that was controlled by Rome and they went out to the desert. These are called the desert fathers and the desert mothers, fourth century. They left because they weren't buying that, and the empire didn't reach out into the wastelands. So they went into the deserts of Egypt and Syria and even Iraq, and they just sort of hung out there and formed communities there, and they were practicing the wisdom teachings, you see. But once the Jesus way got into the empire, some big things changed because the empire, you don't run an empire with diversity. It's the iron fist kind of thing. And so I just can't even imagine being alive at the time that all of a sudden the Constantine said, "Hey guys, we're not killing you anymore for being a Christian. We want you to be part of the group." And so people started coming out of their foxholes, and the bishops, so called, were sort of leaders of community. And he got them together in Turkey, in Nicaea, to hammer. He said, "Yeah, all right, we can't." There was probably about 40 or 50 gospels at that time. Imagine that. 40 or 50 takes on Jesus. And I mean, I read most of them it's the Nag Hammadi library. And I'll shoot you pictures of all these resources, if you really want to follow up anything. But they have all these different takes on Jesus, all these different takes on, because the wisdom was vast. And, that there was, of course, the canonical gospels, which he said, all right, just let's have three or four, not at least 50 or 60. We can't have that much diversity. So they came up with really the four gospels, the three stories, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And then John, which is sort of mystical wisdom. Jesus talks a lot, but there's not a lot of action. So those four that came up, and the rest of them, in 40 years' time, they were burning them all. They said, "Get rid of them. We don't want this. These are heresies, et cetera, et cetera." Well, luckily, some Coptic monks in Egypt, these are Coptic Christians, they just monks are archivists. They just couldn't, so they took these are papyrus now. They didn't have books, the papyri. They took all of these gospels and letters from Sylvanus and all these stuff. It's really a wild bunch of wisdom communities and literature, and they took them outside of in the Upper Nile to outside of a town called Nag Hammadi, and they buried them in a huge kind of vase, almost as tall as like kind of mummy thing, and they just put all these papyri in there, put the top on, buried it, and they said, "Well, later we can dig it up when they come to their senses." Well, it's forgotten, of course. Um, And in 1945, right shortly after the end of the World War, I guess so. But it was in 45. Some shepherd, interesting shepherd, was walking around looking for sheep, and he fell through the roof of this place, and there was this huge urn, and there was this kind of old belief that there was gold buried somewhere out in this desert. And so the guy said, shit, maybe I've hit the, mother lode. He took the top off of this and gold came up out of it. Well, he thought it was gold, but it was just the papyri that had, this real paper thin kind of stuff had been there for centuries. And when he took the release the vacuum, all this gold came up. Well, it wasn't gold. It was all the texts of these gospels, some of them fragmentary. Gospel of Mary Magdalene was in there. Gospel of Thomas was in there. Gospel of Philip. Uh, other takes on it that they didn't want. They just wanted a few of them that we could control that. And as powerful as the four gospels they chose, and they actually made a great imperial decision because uh, wisdom texts were pretty much the sayings of the masters up till that time. They put them in a story, and that's powerful. If you want to unite a people, if you want people to stay together, the glue that holds it is a story. People have been doing stories all the time since the whole Garden of Eden stuff, and even beyond, in Iraq, the first story of the sacred and people, but they're narratives, and then the wisdom comes through the narrative. Well, the Gospel of Thomas, which we're going to use uh, a fair amount, and the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, well, that's almost like a dream sequence when you read the Mary Magdalene. She's in another level that she related to Jesus by. But the Gospel of Thomas, which is a little hard to get now, I'll tell you how to get it because we're going to use it. The Gospel of Thomas um, is 114 wisdom sayings that are every bit as challenging to the left brain as any Zen koan, that the Buddhists use. So there were other forms, but those all got wiped out. You see, by 374, uh, the bishop of Alexandria said we got to burn them all. Well, they saved some, thank goodness. And it did live on in the monks, the women and the men, the desert mothers and fathers. They held that original wisdom thing. It eventually came to Europe when Benedict set up a monastery, the first Western monastery, and John Cashin brings some of these other teachings where they had a meditative tradition, they had a wisdom tradition. There's one of the great uh, uh, texts, which is really interesting. It's called uh, Thunder, the Perfect Mind, and it was. I think came out of some desert mothers. In other words, a group of women, and the speaker is a woman, and it is very interesting. Thunder, the Perfect Mind. That's it's a very short, it's like four, 5, 6 pages as pages go, but it was their view of the universe. See, their view of the universe, and that all got chewed up by the empire because the empire just fitted into the imperial thing where you had the emperor at the top, and when by the time years and years and of being absorbed and co-opted, then you got the Pope at the top. Around the year 1000, they wanted to put the Pope, the bishop in Rome, as the head of the whole shebang. Well, the guys in the East, Greece and Russia, they said, no way, no way. And so they split off the Great Schism at about 1000. So about 700 years, 600 or 700 years into the empire, split off, and they have a very they had a very different view of the wisdom tradition there. But then the Pope became the new emperor. We have the Holy Roman Empire, and you have Roman Catholicism. You have that whole line. Now the wisdom also went through the Middle East. Thomas took the wisdom through the Middle East and ended up in southern India. And I just had a young Indian woman here a couple days ago, and with her family, and and she understood that because she was from the southern part of India, and she was raised Catholic, but it was the Thomas kind of, and there's a lot of churches of Saint Thomas in southern India. So that was it, and that sort of went on to China. It went further east. Another part of Wisdom School came out of the deserts of Egypt and went across North Africa and in through France into like Galicia, where there was, Celts were all around there then in those days. And so the Celts took it all the way through Great Britain to Scotland and over to Ireland. That's a whole other brand of the wisdom tradition that didn't get chewed up by the empire. So there are other traditions where it survived the wisdom Jesus. Now, what happens when it got chewed up by the empire was essentially uh, a wisdom teacher, which is a life giver. Jesus never said he was the Messiah. They were looking for one. He kept trying to put him off. And actually, when you look at the Aramaic text, especially in Thomas, he refers to himself as the Ehidaiah. They didn't have a word for savior, by the way, in Aramaic. He called himself the Ehidaiah, which meant it could be translated literally as the single one, but what it really meant is somebody who was integrated and whole. And so that line in the Gospel of Matthew that was such a kind of an improvised explosive device for a guy like me, because I have an Enneagram kind of energy personality of, if I'm perfect, they'll love me. So perfectionist. Be perfect as your Father in heaven was perfect was how it was translated into English. Be perfect as your Father in heaven. Well, that was like catnip for me. And so I was off and running with that for decades, trying to be perfect. But in Aramaic, Neil Douglas Klotz, when he translated, I loved his translation. It changed my life. He said, I'll become whole as the universe is whole. Wholeness is not oneness. And boy, when you get in the Gospel of Thomas, you really realize that uh, 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 wholeness is integrating the light and the dark. It's the whole. It's not an either or proposition. Like trying to be perfect, you try to hide all the imperfections. You don't want to make mistakes. No, wholeness is different. And wisdom teaching is always whole. When we get to the Taoism, at some point, we're going to spend some time with Taoism. They have the yin yang, that circle, but it's the darkness and the light. And Jesus's first practice was to say, oh gracious one, your oceanic womb births infinite blessing in waves of darkness and light. Just listen to that. Listen to the wholeness there. That's the first line of Undavashmaya. Each one of the lines, and it's translated to Our Father who art in heaven. But really, when you render it out of Aramaic, oh gracious one, the source of all grace. You see, the source, oh gracious one, your oceanic womb births infinite blessing in waves of darkness and light. We've been talking about fierce grace, friendly grace. He's captured it there, and this, what became the Father, because it went through the middle of a kind of a patriarchal, setup, hierarchical setup. My rendering of it was, oh gracious one. He's talking about the source of all grace. Oh gracious one, the source. Your oceanic womb, in case you're thinking there's a gender here, well, if there is anything, the gender would be feminine, because feminine, the human females have the ability to deliver life. Your oceanic womb, it's not your normal womb, it's oceanic, it's infinite. Your infinite womb births uh, uh, infinite blessing in waves of darkness and light. That's the wholeness. And so, yeah, so that is the first line of what they thought was a prayer, the Lord's Prayer, but there were really 8 instructions. He was really giving the apostles who were pretty clueless in most cases, pretty clueless to what Jesus was trying to get at. Uh, he gave them 8 practices, and that's the first one. Uh, to realize that life was a blessing, uh, and uh, it was also in a wave form, and the waves are either darkness or light. You see, but that was all lost. It was all lost because we were running an empire here, and we still have problems. You know, people think it's a bad thing to have diversity in our culture. They want all white people, all Christians, get rid of everybody else. Well, that's a hell of a deportation that they're going to have to go through. It's just not possible, but it's the idea. It's the purity of the Third Reich. Just blonde, blue-eyed, Germans. Get rid of all those dark people. It just can't work. But that's how power and empire works. And so Jesus, of course, is white. The Jesus I saw, Barry Gibb, and so, but he wasn't, it was dark. It was dark. So that's the first thing. That's the first blaze in the trail. He's telling you. And so when this is what I'm going to show the screensaver if you came in late that we started with. Oh, I think I am. Let's see. Yeah. This is that very first word, avun. And avun, if you want to know what dancing with spirit is, for Jesus, it's caught in this word. That's why this becomes a sacred word, because it has 4 parts to it. There's 4 Aramaic letters. These are Roman letters. Our language came from the Romans. Thank goodness the numbers didn't. Can you imagine balancing your checkbook using Roman numerals? Thank God for the Arabs, and the Hindus. The Hindus developed 0, But this is an Aramaic word that actually, if you want to know what dancing with spirit is, it's this. It moves. This was the verb form of the holy for Jesus. Jesus eventually did get uh, charged with blasphemy, which means using words you shouldn't use, because they don't even print the word for the sacred uh, in the Jewish text, and they certainly don't. They use stand-in words for it, but they don't say like Yahweh that Christians are say. That sort of rings badly to Jewish people. You don't say the name, just the way that Islamic people don't have any images of the sacred, because you'll get trapped in a concept or a word. Well, Jesus used 2 words for the sacred. Avun the the dance of the universe as it continually moving. You could say, as Einstein would say, Einstein had this question: does the universe a wave or is it a particle? Is reality a wave or a particle? And you know, eventually he figured out it was both at the same time. It was a wave, a verb, and it was also a particle, a noun. And how is that? How is that possible? Well, it's sort of a mystery, isn't it? But this is the waveform. Ah, boon. And we were chanting it with the first sitting, and we'll chant it with the next sitting. But this is how it moves. Now, that book in the middle, I'll send you a better picture of it. Uh, the Prayers of the Cosmos. That was my little primer that gave me enough information to basically uh, render these 8 lines of what was known as the Lord's Prayer, but really there are 8 specific practices, and then the 8 Beatitudes, which is, it's not the concept of a plan, it is the path. It can guide you once you see it. And that's what we're going to do a month from now. We're going to do that, but we're starting to work with some of the practices. Avun Devashmaya, translated into, O gracious one, your oceanic womb births infinite blessing in waves of darkness and light. And this shows that Ah is the syllable in the Middle East for the sacred, for the source of everything, the source of all grace. the source of life. And so when you breathe that in, you're breathing in the power of the universe. It's a nice thing to have when your life falls apart, which is what the BW is, because this is the fullness, and then the fullness always starts to fall apart. It just does. Just the way you breathe in now. Let's all experience. Just breathe in as deeply as you can, and notice how your breath gets fuller and fuller and fuller, and then it lets go. It starts to, you exhale and it breaks down. And that's everything falls apart at some point. And then you're empty, the ooh. And the beautiful thing about the universe and our own breath is you don't have to think about it. Once the breath goes totally out, something new, a new breath comes in. So actually from the end all the way, when the new breath starts, as you breathe it in, when it's actually in fullness, and then it starts to unload. That's the breath. Now, if you looked at those four letters like a star, uh, a star is born at the end, and then it gets to fullness, and then it starts to fade and actually disappears at the O. And that's what we call it. It collapses into a dark hole. But that gets so dense at some point that it there's a supernova and there's a new star born, and then it gets brighter and brighter to fullness. And because every star, a lot of those stars we see in the sky, astronomers will tell us, burned out a long time ago. I mean, you can't grasp it. The left brain can't grasp that thing. But this is the dance of the spirit. In other words, the dance of the sacred all around. And it repeats, it repeats, it repeats, it repeats. So it's beautiful. And that's why that's a sacred word. Now and so he's giving you that image in the first thing. And there's waves of darkness, there's waves of light. That this is the wave form here, you see. And so when things fall apart in your life, it's not as if you've done anything wrong. I'm telling this to my oldest son now, whose marriage is falling apart. He's at that point. What you do at that point is very serious. You can keep trying to duct tape a relationship together. I've done it. Pam and I did it for decades, and then at some point, she just refused to duct tape it together anymore, and so it fell apart. And then there was great emptiness and darkness, and then something new came out of that, where we are now in the relationship. I know that that's the form. He doesn't know it. When you're at that falling apart stage at any point in your life, losing a job, your child dies, a marriage ends, whatever, Trump is elected. Well, I don't want to get too political here. We think that's the end of the process. It's never the end. See, there is no end. It's infinite. Now, when you look at one last thing, this is the cross. The A, when you go from the A to the O, you're going from fullness to emptiness. And that's the vertical line. And that'll come up a lot in the Gospel of Thomas, because Jesus says, you stand up. You stand up. When you're lying down, you're on the horizontal, and then you're talking about the line of birth, birthing and dying. What happens to every human being. We're born, and then this body dies, and so that's the horizontal. And there's a lot of transactional thing you got to do in this 75 years. You got to do them, and that's where the left brain helps you out on that horizontal. But the vertical, to go from the fullness to the emptiness, that's the vertical dimension. That's the sacred dimension. So survival dimension, sacred dimension. And you have both. It's not either or, except for we don't understand really about the sacred dimension, which is why you're here, hopefully. Because we have the sacred dimension in us, you see. So that he's covering all of that in that first thing. He's just saying, take a look at it. You're connected. You're born from the source of all the universe, and your life will have waves of darkness and light. Now the second line, we can leave this go. This I want, and I'll include these if you want any notes. I'll include my renderings for these particular lines of the Lord's Prayer, these practices. But let me get rid of this for now. Get back to looking at you. Well, it should be. Uh, there we go. That's what I want to hit. Okay. Um, yeah, we're just about out of time, but we'll have a break where you can you just take a breath and write anything that's coming. But what we're going to go to really is the practice of meditation, which is in the second um, line. You know, Our Father who art in heaven, and then the second line is hallowed be thy name. We're talking about the sacred name. That's a practice to have a sacred word. And the way I rendered it was each day we create a space for grace and the dance in our heart of hearts, swept clean by your sacred word. Each day we create a space for grace and the dance in our heart of hearts, swept clean by your sacred word. Nit kadesh smak. Smak means a broom to sweep something clean, you say. And so the power of having a sacred word, the power of a word, and there's all kinds of sacred words, mani padme hum in the Tibetans. Om is the sacred word. It was the first sound that the universe made, according to the Hindus. So the power of sound and a word. And each day we create a space for grace and the dance each day. And so that's where I've been trying to say, that's what I learned, that you've got to stay at this each day. You got to sweep out the remains of the previous day. I remember seeing a guy in Venice. Got up very early one day, and there's all sorts of trash and whatever in St. Mark's Square, and he was out with these big brooms, and these guys were cleaning it, get ready for a new day. So I see that as what you do at your morning prayer. Each day we create a space for grace to get in, and the dance of the whole thing, for grace in the dance in our heart of hearts. This is the dance floor, you see. Your heart of heart, Hafez calls it the jeweled dance floor. This doesn't dance so much. This, buys the groceries. This pays the bills. Great. But when, you've got to have space for this dance, because it's going on all around us. I'm looking out at the trees right now. Leaves are falling. The dance is happening. The universe dances. It's a verb. Buckminster Fuller said God was a verb. You see. So those first two blazes in the trail are really important. And he said, and it's swept clean by your sacred word. Okay, so that's why I'm saying, for this month, if you don't have a sacred word, you can use Avun. And so when we come back for our meditation period in 15 minutes, I'm going to play again and I'll give you the references for this so that you can find this Avun chant on your own if you have a music provider, and you can use it. And what we're simply going to do is just let this sound as we breathe, let this sound sweep the dance floor, make it clear, make it open to grace, and then we'll have another sit, right? But we'll take 15 minutes now. I think that's good enough for now.